In the early days of League of Legends, there was a huge problem that existed in the game. Melee champions versus range champions. These range champions far outclassed and dominated melees, and there was little to nothing you could do to stop them. The poke, the sustain, the pressure, and fighting over every minion, every single CS, completely frustrated anyone trying to play Jax into Morgana top lane. Yes, Morgana top lane. Back then, there weren't the same measures that were put into the game that we have now to help with this issue. No second wind, no resolve tree, no Doran shield, and in general, range champions have had their early base stats and base damage lowered by quite a bit. Don't believe me? Well, LeBlanc on her release could one-shot you by starting boots at level 3. Because of this, there had to be something done. There had to be a way to fix this. There needed to be a melee champion that could survive, take trades and not lose all of their health, have crowd control, and carry the game. And in 2010, we finally got a tease of a champion that was actually on an issue of PC Gamer and then on the official League of Legends forums. As an article by Rift Herald states, this hasn't exactly aged well, saying she is the latest in a long line of pretty ladies joining the League of Legends. Wow. Anyway, that solution was named Irelia, and on November 16th of 2010, she was finally added to the League of Legends. Irelia is an Ionian. The Noxian occupation of Ionia produced many heroes, none more unlikely than the young Irelia of Novori. Trained in the ancient dances of her province, she adapted her art of war using the graceful and carefully practiced movements to levitate a host of deadly blades. After proving herself as a fighter, she was thrust into the role of resistance leader and figurehead, and to this day remains dedicated to the preservation of her homeland.
I've never killed a person. Just a lot of Noxians.
Irelia was designed by Riot Ezreal, who designed a lot of the champions we know and love today. The idea of a melee champion who could do what she could do was refreshing. Overpowered for sure, but refreshing nonetheless. She had it all: the sustain, tankiness, damage, and CC to be a viable melee carry.
We started off wanting a melee DPS who could strive in our current anti-melee metagame. Thus, we gave her heavy defensive abilities, which could transition to heavy offensive abilities. For instance, He10 style used to remove her life gain when it went on cooldown, so the player would have to make the choice between defense and offense. And Transcendent Blades used to provide a flat armor and magic resist boost for each blade she had, so using her blades would cost her defenses. Both of these were neat conceptually, but the costs were so high that they hindered the player's moment-to-moment choices. We decided to move her to more of a fighter assassin who could survive in a team fight. This is accentuated by her resilience to disabling effects provided by her passive, as well as her life gain from both He10 style and Transcendent Blades.
Melee carries are nothing new, but in other games like Dota they were much more prominent. Heroes from Dota such as Anti-Mage, Phantom Assassin, and Bloodseeker are all good carries, but historically in League this isn't really a fun playstyle or what people find fun to play against. So designing a melee champion would end up being quite tricky, because if they had too much CC and were too tanky and did too much damage, then truly there would never actually be a chance for a ranged champion to do anything. A Caitlyn could never get away from an Irelia. However, if they were too weak, they didn't have enough CC, and they couldn't even get out of lane, then ranged champions would always be dominant and would be up 100 CS every game. That is why Irelia on her release posed a deadly threat in the top lane, and would shape the meta for League of Legends for many years to come after that. She is such an important champion and an important release for Riot's history. The same patch that Irelia went live, Hexdrinker was added to the game to help out bruisers and melees with magic damage threats. Once players got a chance to play her and practice her, they eventually figured out what the best build would be, which would be Trinity Force into full tank. At Season 2 Worlds, you can see Wickd building Trinity Force into GA and Black Cleaver, and aside from the Black Cleaver being a little bit weird by today's standard, that build isn't even too far off what she would build in 2019. However, during Season 1 and her early days, we saw a lot of interesting choices. In the Champion Spotlight video, Riot Ezreal, who was her main designer, spoke about her many build choices: lifesteal and on hit, tank, DPS, full tank, full assassin, freak build a Youmuu's Ghostblade in his jungle Irelia game. There were quite a few choices back then. Some players seem to really like Frozen Mallet as an item for Irelia because of the chase down potential. The slow on her E and comboed with her Q for gap closing made her a deadly side lane threat. Remember that back then and back in the day, not every champion had mobility like they do now, so giving this melee champion her Q resets was kind of a crazy ability altogether. At Season 1 Worlds, Irelia saw a moderate amount of play, having 3 bans and 4 picks. Truthfully, there were still some problems with her back then. At times, it was hard fitting into team comps, as players didn't know where she was supposed to go. Was she a jungler or a top laner? Were you supposed to build damage or tank? Was she only good mid game? Was she only good early game? Did she scale well? She was seen as a good top laner, but the meta still didn't really favor her. However, once Season 2 rolled around, she became god tier. In Season 2, the jungle was changed. The jungle was made much easier to clear, and even though it did give less golden experience over time, it was also better for AoE champions because the big monster at the camp had less HP, and the little ones were given a bit more HP. Junglers could start longsword plus potions, or a health regen item, or a Doran's Blade, and have a nice easy clear. This would allow more tanky and supportive style junglers to become S tier, as things such as Maokai, who would become the perfect fit for the new jungle, became one of the best junglers in the game. Season 2 would also be the era of 2 to 3 people on a team getting gold generation items. They were quite different back then, and they had very weak stats for their cost, meaning they were not gold efficient, but they passively generated 5 gold per 10 seconds. You could buy several of them. Philosopher's Stone gave health and mana regen, Heart of Gold gave health, and those two became the most common. Philosopher's built into what is known as Shirelia's Reverie, and Heart of Gold built into Randuin's Omen. Supports, top laners, and junglers would usually end up with both of those, either selling them once they had no more item slots or would build their upgrades. Coupling this information together on top of people simply getting better at Irelia, it's not hard to see why she became top tier. Your team composition was solid with an Irelia top lane, a Maokai jungle, a Cassiopeia or Orianna mid lane, with a Kog'Maw and a Lulu bottom lane. The crazy thing is that in Season 1, most team comps that were played were essentially trolling by modern standards, but even just 1 year later in Season 2, that is a legitimate comp that could work in today's game, even with several reworks to these champions, which is kind of funny as well. In October of 2012, the World Championship for Season 2 came to what would become the hub for all things esports in the following years, Los Angeles, California. This was a historical Worlds, and an interesting thing is that this is the first time Korea participated at Worlds. Only shortly before that fall, the first server came to Korea for League of Legends, and until 2018, where last year China's IG won Worlds, Season 2 was the last time that Korea did not win. The Taipei Assassins, or TPA, were a Taiwanese powerhouse that would go on to win the tournament. In fact, in the finals, the only game that they lost to Azubu, and ultimately their 3-1 victory, was against none other than an Irelia top lane. During Season 2 Worlds, Irelia saw a good amount of play in total, having 9 bans and 7 picks. Players were basically settled on her Trinity Force into tank build, and this is also back in the day where Trinity Force had critical strike chance on it. This meant that over time, through sheer luck even sometimes, you'll have plenty of damage and win trades in extended fights because your autos sometimes will crit. Sometimes you just get lucky. Clearly, this is a very unhealthy game mechanic, but truly back then, this wasn't even the worst thing that was in the game, which is also probably why it took Riot so long to change Trinity Force. When you have assassins who have silences, Triforce having crit is one of the least of your worries. When it comes to her playstyle, it wasn't just Irelia that was strong during this meta. The top lane meta was all about sustain and some off tanks. Jax had Spellvamp, Udyr was a good top laner, Irelia was solid, Lee Sin and Riven had a much higher health regen back then, and Lee Sin had even higher base stats than he has now, and if your champion didn't have sustain, how are they supposed to trade blow by blow while laning? Now, it wouldn't be a History of Irelia video without tackling the better nerf Irelia meme. The idea of the meme was that back in the day, players time and time again would say and notice that no matter what happened, no matter what champions or items or runes that were overpowered, they better nerf Irelia too. Kayle is too strong? Well, better nerf Irelia. Infinity Edge does too much damage? Better nerf Irelia, etc, etc. Irelia mains and players were known for their complaints that their champion was just always getting some nerfs. Here's the thing, because that was happening and Riot knew that Irelia players were complaining about this meme may have had the exact opposite effect. In fact, in all honesty, before she was reworked, Irelia was one of the least nerfed champions of all time. The saying back then held almost no intrinsic value.
Better nerf Irelia is kind of an outdated joke at this point, but way back in Season 2 it was a super popular notion that in the end, no matter what happened, Irelia would get nerfed.
So, it's like Irelia. Irelia for some reason doesn't get nerfed. Even though she's been relevant forever as Irelia players. Irelia players and AD carries are the most vocal players by far. It's like, you always nerf us. When was the last time Irelia's even been nerfed? I'm gonna go look it up. Let's go look it up right now.
Over here.
She hasn't even been nerfed! Holy Irelia players are geniuses! Like, she doesn't even get nerfed. This has all been buffs!
And on that list, Irelia scores an 8 total nerf score, which actually doesn't even put her in the top 40 most nerfed champions.
As far as Irelia build and strategies, back then, as we said, you would almost never build any damage items aside from Trinity Force. There were players who valued things such as Blade of the Ruined King, Youmuu's Ghostblade, Wit's End, or Rage Blade, but the high elo and one tricks most of the time thought otherwise. The reason this would work for Irelia and she would do enough damage simply by only building Trinity Force into full tank has a lot to do with what skills you would max and the way that your W worked. Irelia's W Heat 10 style had a passive and an active, and it was an ability that didn't have any type of scaling. The ability only got stronger by putting points into it. The maximum true damage you could get per auto attack was 75, so your skill order for the old Irelia was almost always W into E into Q. Maxing your E second would increase the duration on your slow and stun, and it had a pretty good base damage. But here's the problem, Irelia was not an AP champion. You were not building ability power, and look at the two skills that you were putting all of your points into up until level 13. One of them scales with nothing, and the other one scales with AP on an AD fighter champion. Huh, that's pretty bad design. The compensation for this is that you would get attack speed, health and AD, crit chance, ability power, and spellblade from Trinity Force, and around levels 6 to 13 you just try to snowball as much as you possibly can while itemizing tank after your Triforce. She was much more auto attack based back then because your Q was not nearly as strong of an ability as it is now, and of course 75 true damage on hit is really good damage, but that is a flat number, not scaling. This means that at level 9 when your W is maxed out, your opponent could have around 1200 or 1500 health, you will feel that 75 true damage on hit. In just 10 auto attacks during your trades, the bonus damage alone would deal 750 damage, obviously not taking into account any other damage in your kit. Irelia would be the queen of mid-game. You wanted to do everything you can after you got your Trinity to start that deadly snowball. Dive your opponents, win 2v1s with your tenacity and point and click 2-second stun, deal with tanks early game because of your sustain and true damage, dash all around the minions with your Q once you have a sheen. The champ was fun, deadly early and mid game, and had some very favorable matchups in certain metas. A team could easily play around an Irelia top lane as a real carry threat. Early game junglers that were dominant in Season 4 like Lee Sin, Kha'Zix, Elise, and Rengar made it a horrible experience as a top laner getting chain stunned by an Irelia and an Elise and getting camped until you rage quit. At the time, this was a pretty standard rune page with the old runes. You were pretty much dipping into every stat that you can here, and they are all important for your damage and survival. For her playstyle, there were a couple of matchups that you did really well into. The Riven matchup was slightly favored for Irelia, but still a very fun skill matchup. Irelia had a ton of burst after her Sheen, and a lot of outplay potential when it comes to a last second stun by Irelia, leading into Riven's death. However, if Riven itemized correctly, typically building health and ninja tabby, it became almost entirely a skill-based matchup. Irelia by design was a simple champion, but required good macro understanding of the game and not wasting all of your spells and cooldowns. She was a methodical laner that used her built-in sustain from her W to heal up after some short trades, and had to play heavily around her cooldowns. There is a really cool article/guide on Liquid Legends, and I gotta say, I love these old guides. They're a blast from the past and just hit you with those nostalgia feels. I always love finding little gems like these, and even back in 2011, some players were talking about really good EU Irelias such as Wickd. These notable Irelia players made such an impact on the community. Everyone who mained Irelia at least knew about guys like Wickd and Ireliacarriesu. If you liked Irelia, you could learn so much from watching them play. Speaking of notable times and impacting the community, there was one thing that happened a few years later in 2015.
Huh. I don't know if this is a mid-Rumble or if it's going to be a mid-Irelia.
Interesting. All right, well, Corky Irelia chosen, and Gorilla may just be going with that safe Janna pick, but Coup Tigers have got to be scratching their heads right now. Yeah, I mean, if you look at Gorilla on your screen right now, he looks a bit confused.
Irelia mid was pulled out by none other than Faker in week 3 of LCK Summer. He had been practicing it quite a bit in solo queue against meta mid lane mages at the time such as Azir and Victor mid. If you don't remember this meta, this was the meta of super long range scaling mids. Back then you would even play Lethality Varus mid and just try to poke them out from maximum range. Turns out, Irelia mid could do well versus those types of champions. While it's true that you were heavily outranged, these types of champions, if they got jumped on, would not be able to get themselves out. Victor's stun from his W took a long time to ramp up, Varus only has a little bit of a slow on his E and CC with his ultimate, and Azir's escape with his E is a very long cooldown unless he wastes his ult just to get an Irelia off of him. Because of her Q resets, built-in sustain and built-in tenacity, you could actually farm mid lane and move around the map. It's not too different from a Zed mid, except early game you're quite a bit tankier. As the story always goes with Faker though, if he knows how to play something, chances are he knows how to play against something too. At Season 5 Worlds, G4 would end up sniping away Faker's Irelia mid to kinda show him up. After all, they were a wildcard team playing against the best team in the world. Let's just say it didn't work out too well for G4.
For both these guys, their base health is actually quite low. Both do plenty of damage early on, so like an all-in is possible to do the damage. You can see G4 trying to go flash.
Oh, there's a ghost. He popped and he's going after G4. He's got no flash. He's got no life. First blood, 1v1. Olaf versus Irelia. That's a sentence that was actually said in the World Championships. He's in trouble, man. G4 goes in on Faker to zone him out. Faker pops that Ragnarok, gonna slow him down with the undertow. 07 backing off already.
Oh, the
and
action.
I think he's in trouble.
There's
one more.
There's the two.
A little bloodthirsty action for Wolf there as he picks that one up.
After Season 5, heading into Season 6 and Season 7, in pro play, Irelia didn't seem too prominent. She was picked in spots here and there, but mostly either full tanks or full carries were played top lane during this era. Rarely were there bruisers on top. That being said, she was seen as a good counterpick to Gnar, who used to be very strong in competitive play. Irelia did well with Fervor of Battle as a keystone choice, and because you could easily jump onto Gnar and he had no hard CC in his mini-form, you didn't really have a bad time against him. It felt like Gnar, unless played perfectly, you always opened yourself up to being punished. During this time frame, Irelia also received a splash art and base art square update. On patches 6.7 and 6.8, Riot wanted to unify champion arts globally. Some of their older champions had completely different splash arts on servers like the Chinese server versus all of the other ones. Some arts they updated completely, and others they unified together with the Chinese counterpart. Irelia was given her Chinese splash art, which some did complain about the green background being a bit lazy, but that's more subjective than anything. Personally, I did like the old one better, but hey, I can see why the Chinese one is nice too. In solo queue, however, Irelia was a strong bruiser in Season 5, receiving a nerf on patch 5.6, and again in Season 6. Trinity Force was changed to give cooldown reduction, which being much healthier for the game, also allowed a champion like Irelia to spam her already decently low cooldown spells more often. She was already one of the best champions using the new corruption potion at the time, and she would be nerfed again on patch 6.13. She also received a massive change to her passive on patch 6.16. This would be the straw that broke the camel's back for Irelia as a champion, and ultimately would shape the way the rest of her existence as this version would play out. You see, this change was not only an intended nerf, of course, but there were also serious problems with this as well. There were plenty of bugs that would cause Irelia's passive simply to just not work anymore. So where does this leave us? Well, in Season 7, Irelia had some problems. She was no longer a very good fighter. Honestly, she was kind of a dead champion during Season 7. So let's see. How about we talk about this item? Duskblade of Draktharr became a fun and interesting Irelia build for a while. It would help your one-shot rotation and give you 30% CDR in combination with Trinity Force. Players were trying this for quite a while, and it seemed pretty good. It helped compensate for the last couple of nerfs, and Irelia found herself to be a straight-up assassin. Unfortunately, as things go, a lot of champions were also good with Duskblade, not just Irelia, so the item was eventually nerfed, and it no longer became viable despite its time in the spotlight. Okay, so in the story we went from unsure what her role is, to relevant and good champion for 3 to 4 years, overpowered for 1 year, just kind of okay, overpowered again, short time in the spotlight as an assassin, and now bad and kinda useless and outclassed by Riot's new fighters that have just become the better version of Irelia. They were just her new version. So what now? Well, we knew that the Irelia rework was coming even as early as 2017. Riot released their official champion roadmap in October of that year, letting us know they were in the process of reworking Swain, Aatrox, and of course, Irelia. The first teaser was uploaded to the League of Legends YouTube channel on March 16th, 2018. Irelia's journey to being reworked was a long and tough one for Riot, however their reasoning for reworking her I still do believe is solid.
Champions because we started to see this really big difference between the stuff we're really proud of releasing and then stuff that we probably could have done a little better when we released it. Irelia is kind of an unusual choice as far as that goes.
She can do everything, but she doesn't really excel in all those things.
She has a very strong fantasy that's resonated with a lot of our players, but her gameplay has generally been lacking in actually delivering on that fantasy for one.
It's not fulfilling the fantasy of multiple blades flying at you or multiple blades or dancing at you.
If we can really nail the Blade Dancer fantasy, we can make her one of the coolest champions in the league.
One thing that they always need to make sure of when they rework champions is that their current mains and players don't hate the rework. I know for all you players out there who have had their champion reworked how frustrating and scary it can feel. Personally, if they ever reworked my Riven, I don't know what I would do. I'm still sad to this day about the LeBlanc revert, and I wish I could play the old one.
Everybody would be a little bit nervous hearing that like a champion that they really like to play is getting like a massive update.
For Irelia's rework, Riot enlisted the help of Ireliacarriesu.
Player Labs is Riot's opportunity to test out our content with players, like not internally, not with our development teams, but with actual real players.
So we have been looking for people who either currently play Irelia and like her, or people who play top lane skirmishers or similar characters and like those as well.
Ireliacarriesu is like a really notable Irelia main in the community, and we want to specifically invite him into playtest.
Even though the stun wasn't the same, I still felt like, oh yeah, it's still there, and I can still set up the same stuff that I used to set up before. But at the same time, I'm not like reliant on always having my flash up if I want to do the same.
Getting his read on it at that point was really, really helpful. Being able to say like, hey, these are some of the things that we want to hold true. What do you think?
Overall, Kit seems to be doing pretty well. Not going to hate us for this rework.
No, I don't think so. I think it's in the right direction.
After months upon months, day in, day out, struggling to find out what they can and cannot do, Riot finally finished up with the rework, and on April 4th, 2018, this is what we got on the live servers.
There is beauty and tradition in the dance, grace in every step, power in every turn. Our dance is an honor to perform. And the last thing our enemies will ever see.
Literally on day 1 of the release of the rework, Irelia was nerfed. Having a hotfix is nothing new to League of Legends, but it would only be fitting for the nerf queen herself that she would receive a nerf less than 24 hours after its release. Immediately, Irelia's rework left a massive shockwave in the League of Legends community. She was the new phenomenon in town. So many high elo players and pros were trying her out, the old mains and new mains alike were learning how to play as and against her, and her pick and ban rate shot way up as a result of this popularity. Right away, most players assumed that Irelia was supposed to be a top laner. After all, she was pretty much a top laner her whole lifespan as a champion before, and that mid lane Irelia stuff was a joke, right? I mean, Faker just used it during that meta. He's trolling otherwise for sure, no? Well, League of Legends is a funny game sometimes, and history always seems to repeat itself. Somehow, someway, Faker invented both old and new Irelia in the mid lane. Sometimes the world just makes sense. Irelia had great success as a mid laner after her rework because truly, this was the perfect lane for her. The total damage reduction on her W made her great at dealing with burst mages, and she had the sustain and damage to be god tier mid if played well. She was instantly seeing success at high elo and competitive play as a mid lane champion, and her kill pressure was unbelievable. So many high elo mids and pro players were known for their Irelia 1v9 performances.
Around the Echo Box carries, TSM put all the way in. Huni just buying time as Bjergsen, he lines up the quadra.
It's a quadra for Bjergsen. He is feeling it, taunting onto Huni in that zone is Hourglass.
Give me the assassin, give me the carry, give me the kills, and give me game number 5. Bjergsen will push TSM to where he always has the pentakill and the chance for another.
At the time, she seemed quite unfair and unfun to play against as a mid laner. She even synergized very well with the old Conqueror rune. Back when the resolve tree was best in every situation, Irelia's would be even tankier by taking bone plating. She received several nerfs as the days went on due to her prominence in the mid lane. The mid lane meta at the time was Irelia, LeBlanc, Aatrox, and Akali, 3 of which were recently reworked into those states. The meta was all about being as hard to 1v1 as possible and being strong enough early game to help your jungler contest Scuttlecrab with your lane priority. While measures have been implemented since then to help with this problem, this is still a major issue Riot is trying to tackle today. Riot didn't seem to be a big fan of mid lane Irelia, and she would eventually be pushed out of the mid lane because of several changes she received. Firstly, Irelia's W damage reduction was changed to now only be physical damage reduction. Also, maxing your E second is now better for more stuns, but this is worse for mid lane Irelia as being able to max your W before as a second choice with 65% damage reduction, as well as the cone of wave clear was quite helpful for mid. Also, the new Conqueror rune after its rework has made it much better against tanks, and it's great in very extended long fights, but definitely hurt the burst for mid lane. Irelia right now is seen as a B or A tier top laner, and is situationally a good pick into some other fighters and tanks, as her physical damage reduction and level 6 all-in is quite good. Of course, not everything is about balance, or pro play, or even how OP or fair a champion is. Sometimes League of Legends is all about fun and entertainment. After all, it's just a game at the end of the day. There is no better way to get entertainment in gaming than on Twitch.tv. Twitch streamers can be aided and successful by how exciting their gameplay is. And when you play really flashy champions such as Irelia, and you are incredibly good at the most popular game in the world, success is almost a given. One streamer that has become incredibly popular over the last couple of years, but even more recently because of his Irelia gameplay, is TF Blade. TF Blade, otherwise known as Ashkin, has been challenger for multiple seasons, and has always been known for his Irelia and his Akali. However, he has blown up in popularity ever since both of those champions have received their reworks. They are flashier and cooler than ever, and it's hard to get tired of watching his Irelia montage. He is just so clean at the champion. Players such as TF Blade, Ireliacarriesu, Wickd, and many others are who help make this champion fun, interesting, exciting, and entertaining. But in 2019, none of this would be possible without Riot's rework of Irelia. I have to give it to the Riot Rework team. I can honestly say that I think the Irelia rework is the single best thing they have ever created. I don't think she is the most fun to play against, and I don't even necessarily think she is the most fair champion. I'm not saying that I'm a balance expert, and I'm not even saying she's not overpowered. What I am saying is the music, the art, the abilities, the lore, the skins, and the gameplay couple together to be one of the most exciting things in all video games for me. She is so fun, so fast, so quick, and feels so smooth to play, and most importantly, it's one of the things that keeps me coming back to this game. Remember that not everything is about being perfectly balanced. People don't always want something that is very fair to play against. What they do want is something to keep them coming back, keep them entertained, and make them feel like a pro when they play well. I do think that Irelia fulfills the fantasy of Blade Dancer, and I think that I'll be playing her for years to come. Irelia is nearing on 9 years old, but with a fresh new rework last year, she's not slowing down anytime soon. Besides, there are still Noxians that need to be killed.